Thank you for joining us for the College of Early Childhood Educators' 16th Annual Meeting of Members.
The purpose of the annual general meeting of members is to share highlights of the college's accomplishments and results during the last fiscal year, which tonight covers July the 1st, 2023 through to June 30th, 2024. I'd also like to acknowledge RECEs who continue to demonstrate leadership, resilience, and excellence in their work, in spite of the ongoing systemic challenges in our sector. And through it all, you remain steadfastly committed and work together for our shared goal, the safety and well-being of children. I applaud you and I thank you. Celebrating 15 years of public protection and practice excellence. This is the theme of this year's annual report. In February, the college celebrated its official 15th anniversary. In the first 4 months of the college opening its doors, more than 4,000 individuals applied to become members of the college. Today, I am one of over 63,000 RECEs in the profession, and this is a distinction we can hold with great pride. 2023-2024 marked the second year of our ambitious 5-year strategic plan, which will guide us as we position ourselves for even more growth in the profession. Under our first goal, proactive public protection, the college continues to evolve the focus of regulation to emphasize proactive intervention using data to identify areas of risk and prevent harm. Under our first objective, the goal is applying evidence-based innovation in regulation and governance. The volume of incoming complaints was at a record high this year. However, proactive work to streamline processes and efficiently manage low-risk complaints helped council and staff address cases at a brisk pace. Under our second objective, equip and support practice excellence, the volume of work was also exceptionally high. This year, members were reminded to confirm completion of the Sexual Abuse Prevention Program, which is critical for the protection of children. Since its launch in 2022, over 58,000 RECEs, including 41,702 this fiscal year, have completed the program. However, this success required significant efforts by the college to support member compliance with the program. Nearly 13,200 members entered the non-compliance process for not completing the program. But by the end of the fiscal year, 91% of non-compliant members had completed the program. A new practice guideline, professional boundaries, and an accompanying practice note, professional relationships, were also launched this year. And finally, the third objective under this goal is to build a resilient and sustainable profession. The college engaged with sector partners to better understand the challenges around workforce retention and recruitment related to the implementation of the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Program. This work, including ongoing discussions with government about the workforce strategy and collaborating with research partners to gather important insights from RECEs that could inform new solutions. Our second goal, collaborative leadership and engagement, involves working across boundaries to identify and address systemic challenges to support high-quality practice and access to care. This year, the college made strong progress in its efforts to embed equity, diversity, and inclusion in all areas of its work, including policies, partnerships, and outreach, and the resources it develops to support RECEs in their practice. Additionally, the college worked closely with the Indigenous Advanced Education and Skills Council to develop a harmonized process for the review of diploma programs in early childhood education programs offered by Indigenous post-secondary institutions. Under our second objective, around building meaningful relationships, the college produced and began implementation of 2 key plans to guide its work. Finally, our third objective is about the generation and sharing of high-quality data. The college created a new department and brought on board a new director of data and research. This expertise will guide efforts across the college to ethically collect, analyze, and manage data in ways that are focused and aligned with our strategic goals and support the needs of our partners in the sector. The achievements of the past year have required much hard work and dedication by our council and college staff. I am tremendously proud of everything that we've accomplished this year and excited for the year ahead as we continue to work toward a resilient profession, uphold quality in the sector, and continue our most important work, protecting children and families. This concludes my council chair report. The full annual report is now available on the college's website. At every annual meeting of members, we present a report from one of our council committees to profile its work. This year, we'll be receiving a report from the Discipline Committee, which performs an essential role in the college's duty to protect the public interest by dealing with the most serious cases of professional misconduct by RACEs. It is my pleasure to welcome back Jen Breton.
Thank you, Christine. I am pleased to be here to share information about the work of the committee done in 23-24. It is important to start with some context. The vast majority of RACEs are trusted, accountable professionals who practice the profession in a manner that supports the development and well-being of children. With that said, an important responsibility of the college as the regulator of the profession is to address the behavior of the small number of RACEs whose practice falls short of professional standards. That brings us to the work of the Complaints and Discipline Committees. The Complaints Committee considers and investigates complaints regarding the conduct of RACEs and, as needed, may refer the most serious of those complaints to the Discipline Committee. These are the cases involving the most serious allegations and the greatest risk of harm to children. Only 10% of the complaints received by the college are referred to the Discipline Committee, which determines if an RACE is guilty of professional misconduct. The work of the Discipline Committee is complex and incredibly serious. It is some of the most important work done by the college and addresses the kind of conduct that the vast majority of RACEs would not and should not tolerate in the profession, including abuse and neglect of children. Each year, increasing numbers of complaints are referred on to the Discipline Committee. In 23-24, the Complaints Committee referred 53 cases to the Discipline Committee, which is a 77% increase over the number of referrals the previous year. This volume of new cases will mean that the Discipline Committee will be increasingly busy in the years to come. In 23-24, the Discipline Committee held hearings in 34 cases in relation to the following allegation of professional misconduct by RACEs. 19 cases involving inappropriate behavior guidance, 9 cases involving failure to supervise, and 6 related to a variety of other matters. In the case in which members were found guilty of professional misconduct, a wide range of penalties were imposed depending on the details of the case. These included suspension of membership, mandatory coursework and mentorship, and several instances where membership with the college was revoked because the conduct was truly egregious and risk of harm to children for this individual was just too high to attempt remedial action. In one such example for this year, the conduct included physical abuse, such as forcibly grabbing a child with disabilities and kicking another child who had difficulty tying their shoe. The subject matter can be very difficult, but it is incredibly important work that is directly connected to the college mandate and protecting children from harm. It also helps protect the reputation of the profession as a whole. The college approach to discipline is founded in equity and fairness. While the circumstances of every case are different, the college's approach is consistent. RECs are treated with respect throughout the process, and they are provided with the opportunity to present their version of the facts and any evidence supporting their perspective. The college provides RECs with information around how the process will work and what will happen. RECs are also welcome and encouraged to retain legal counsel to support them throughout the process. Under a strategic plan, one of our key objectives is evidence-based innovation in regulation and governance. With that in mind, the college is constantly reviewing and improving its systems and processes, with a particular emphasis on equity. The Discipline Committee has already approved process changes to help address inequalities and facilitate the full participation of RECs in the hearings process. These changes include the addition of a neutral facilitator to oversee the case before the hearing. They will help RECs understand every step, their options, and the consequences of those options. These changes, when implemented over the coming year, will make a tremendous difference for the small number of RECs whose alleged conduct results in a referral to the Discipline Committee. They will also go a long way in supporting the college's focus on equity in everything we do. The work of the Discipline Committee is among the most important work done by the college. It directly protects children by ensuring that individuals whose conduct puts children at risk are managed appropriately. When it is considered safe, the REC is given the opportunity to learn through further education, mentorship, or other interventions, and to ultimately return to practice with any necessary limitations on their practice to ensure the safety of the children in their care. And when the risks are high, the individual is removed from the profession to protect children from harm. This work is also critical to protecting the reputation of the profession and of the majority of RECs who are dedicated to practicing the safety and care of children as their first priority. I'd like to thank all the members of the committee for their dedication this year and going forward as the volume of our work continues to grow and as we evolve our processes to meet the needs of RECs. With that, I'll hand it back to Christine to continue with the rest of the annual meeting.
Thank you, Jen. This marks the end of our presentations for this meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the 2023-2024 annual report is now available on the college's website. That is college-ece.ca. I wanted to make note that the College of Early Childhood Educators will soon be on Instagram. We look forward to reaching even more of our members and interacting with them on the platforms where they can connect and engage. Watch for an announcement in the future issue of Connections and our LinkedIn page when we go live. Until then, you can connect with us on LinkedIn, and you can visit College Talk blog for latest articles that support your practice of excellence. Our 16th annual meeting of members has officially come to an end.